Hello, hello. What's up? What's up? It is a new day, it is a new week, and it's time to get social. My name is KaVonna, and welcome to the Introvert's Social Hour. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Introvert Social Hour. My name is KaVonna, and today, I know the topic might have threw you off for a second. We are talking about death, and I wanted to let you know why we're talking about it. It's an often avoided topic in regards to what it looks like to prepare for someone's funerals, prepare for someone's wills, handling grief, what that looks like. I think it's because it's something that we as humans are so afraid of, validly so, but it's so important to talk about it in order to be prepared. So when someone does pass, it doesn't leave anyone with this like chaotic mess in addition to grieving. So I just thought it'd be important to talk about. I feel like, especially me being in my 20s now, it's just something that my mind kind of rambles on sometimes when brains be braining. I think it's important. And so I brought this up to my friends Sabrina and Nicole, and they were down to hop on this conversation with me for the podcast. Y'all already know Sabrina and Nicole. The trio is usually here most of the time throughout the seasons. So please welcome Sabrina and Nicole as we talk about death today. That's the most excited way I could say that.
Yes, so ramped up. We're so excited.
Right. um I wanted to kind of jump in with the icebreaker question. Can you share a kind of like lighthearted memory related to a conversation or moment with a loved one? And I can kind of like break it off in regards to it. For me, I just started to like bring the conversation up with my mom of like, hey, I think we should kind of like talk about these things to prepare. It was not something we talked about. I can't even think of the idea of bringing it up to my grandma because she'd be like, why are you bringing that up? Like
Mm.
she would kind of freak out. But my mom actually was pretty open about the idea. She was like, actually, yeah, like, you know, I've been, we have my mom is the reason why we all have life insurance. My grandma has life insurance and stuff. She was like, yeah, it's been something that we would need to like go over. She's my person and everything like that. So, and I was like, eventually, I know I'm young, but I feel like I should still like make a will or something too. But that was something that was like recent within the last year of convo.
Um, we talk about death like often in this house, in this household. Um, because I grew up where my dad's oldest brother, he died when he was 24. So it's
Mhm.
always been very constant of on his birthday or on the anniversary of his passing, we would go and things like that. So my house, on Tuesday, on this Tuesday, we celebrated his birthday like we usually do. And this year, my tia decided that she just wanted to tell stories of like their antics in Nicaragua and how like she told us a story of one time they went to a wedding or to a graduation party. I don't remember which one it was, and like they broke out into like a full on fight, and she got like beer bottles to like hit somebody with when like they punched my Theo who has passed away.
Mhm.
And then she was dancing to all the songs. So she used to dance with him too, because he was her oldest brother.
Yeah.
So it's nice. It's a nice little balance of like you can feel the sadness in there, but I always like it because I was like hearing these stories of this person I never met, but I could tell you a whole bunch about because of that.
Yeah.
So that's like the
Mm.
most recent and something that we've done my whole life.
All right.
That's very nice.
Mhm.
Mhm.
My family has a very practical approach to death, like I think with most things. And weirdly enough, because we don't, a lot of our family is like a couple states away. We don't get to see them that often.
Mhm.
And with my dad's side of the family, kind of the only time we really see the extended family beyond his sister is when it comes to funerals, because my grandpa had four brothers, and so that their children, that side of the family is pretty big, but we only really see them when one of them passes away. And so it's
Mhm.
kind of this mixed feeling of like, yes, it's difficult emotions and hard to like think about losing somebody, but it's also mixed in with this kind of like family reunion aspect that is also really nice,
Mhm.
especially with people that we don't often get to see. So it's like, see, and actually, one of my great uncles passed away just recently, and so my dad was sharing pictures of the funeral, and it's so wild to see, like, people that I only see every like 5-10 years, and how big everybody's gotten. Like all the kids are now grown up.
Mhm.
It's like this interesting mixed emotion of like dealing with the loss, but also the joy of getting to see like all family all together, which is not super common for us. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like a nice happy moment in the midst of all the like rough feelings.
Mhm.
That's really
Yeah.
nice. I never thought of it like that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
I don't know how to frame it because I don't want to say bittersweet
Yeah.
necessarily. But there's this idea, like even in connected with your story, Sabrina, like this like reminiscence of it all.
Mm.
And that idea of like, wow, something those memories that those beautiful memories that came out of knowing this person, even though also dealing with that loss. And then like the beautiful memories that come from unfortunately even like losing that person and actually like connecting and such, which is so interesting. It's an interesting like dynamic because I can say the same thing for I feel like it's very similar in all families. Like, oh, I haven't seen you in a
Mm.
long time, but we linked up because of this unfortunate event. So
Yeah.
no, I get that. Um, Okay, so I want to talk about why talking about death is important. Just to kind of like lay the groundwork on, of course, like why we're here in the first place. Um, but my first question with that is, why do you think people are generally uncomfortable about talking about death? There are a few
I,
theories there, I know. Yeah.
yeah, I think it also differs like depending on people's like outlook and life situation. I know once when you're young, you're kind of like you don't want to talk about it because you're like it's never going to happen to me. Like it feels so impossible and far away that um the concept it feels almost premature to be thinking about those things when you're like I'm young, like nothing's going to happen to me, everything's fine.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, whether they register it or not, do have a little bit of superstition around it about like if you think about or talk about or deal with death too much, you're like inviting it into your life.
Mhm.
Whereas in it can almost have the opposite effect where when if something unexpected does happen, you've now added all of this on top of it where there's this lack of preparation and like fear around it from avoiding it,
Yeah.
and it makes it all so much more tense and complicated.
Hmm. I agree with that. Yeah. What about you, Sabrina?
I I think it's like the only real thing in life that is actually like final. It's
Mm.
the only thing that is a guarantee. It's the only thing that nobody knows anything really about.
Mhm.
So even based on what you think, like if you believe there is something afterwards, um, with that also comes the potential like fear of what if I'm wrong? And what if my whole life I've lived up to this and it's not there? If you think you're going to see your loved ones, it's also this idea of like, what if I don't get to? What if it's there? And then if you think
Mhm.
this is it, then what happens to you? I think it
Yeah.
holds so much potential for just like fear.
Mm.
And as a whole, I don't think we really talk about the things that scare us too much. We like to avoid that as much as possible. But it's something that no one gets to avoid eventually.
Mm.
So it's also that little conundrum, the little thing of like, we don't want to, but it's also the only thing we're ever actually guaranteed.
Yeah, and you don't get to really control it past like
Mm-mm.
you don't get to control that it happens, and often you don't get to control how or when. Like it's just
Yep.
a
Yeah.
result of aging or an accident happens or something like that. Like it is
Mhm.
one of the things we have the least control over. And so it's easier to be like, well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway. I'm just not going to deal with it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so true. Kind of like that avoidance in a
Mm.
sense. Just like I think there's a specific word for it in regards to talking about death, but um yeah. No, it's so interesting. Especially because I feel like too in regards to I find it so interesting because we know that we need to prepare for it.
Mm.
Like we know that there's things that come out of it. We've seen people be like, we never talked about it, so we struggled incredibly bad. We didn't know how to scrunch up for the money. There's people who
Mm.
don't have life insurance, and that's another issue in itself. And it's just like I've seen all of that happen before, and it's just like even amongst those kind of things happening, people will still not, be ready to prepare and the idea of just like not wanting to address it, not want to talk about it. And I do hate the fact, of course, like anyone does, that it is a thing that unfortunately is solidified. It is going to happen at
Mm.
some point. Um, but it is important to address. And I remember being a kid and always like, I feel like that's always been my greatest fear. When people ask you like, what's your greatest fear?
Mm.
I was always just like, I remember for me it'd be like, 100% like losing close family members.
Mm.
I had already lost a parent. But that in its sense was a bit of a different feeling because, he wasn't really 100% present all the time. But even then, I remember that still hurt. So
Mhm.
like I can't knowing that that hurt and I wasn't seeing him every day, he didn't know 100% about me. I didn't know 100% about him. I can't fathom the idea of like losing like people who are incredibly close to me because like, oh my goodness, that was a thought in my mind growing up a lot. Just like, like, girl, you're gonna have to stick it out to 110 or something
Yeah.
because I'm gonna need you to be around for a while.
Yeah. Nobody else in my family is allowed to die. I forbid it.
Right.
I always think about the little I think it's Winnie the Pooh. The little quote of like, if you live to be 100, I hope I live to be 100 minus a day, so that I never have to live
Mhm.
without you. And I always tell Cassandra that because I look at Cassandra, I'm like, you're not allowed to die before me. Like, it's not. There's
Mhm.
no way. I was like, sorry.
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's like not an option, not a choice.
It's
But yeah,
not.
think
It's
about
not.
that. So I've also considered that as well, as I'm pretty sure, like, I feel like these are topics that people think about a lot, but don't really talk about a lot. I've
Mhm.
thought about that as well. And I'm like, for me, my mom, like, no, listen,
Yeah.
like, no, don't you dare. But at the same time, it's like, I hate to say it, she is older than me. As all
Mhm.
parents are. And then I was like, I used to think once again when I was younger, and then I grew older and I understood the perspective a little bit more. I used to be like, no, I gotta go first. I gotta go. I'm sorry, I can't deal with that. I can't mentally. And then I was like, but that's incredibly unfair to my mom as well.
Oh yeah.
So I
Mhm.
thought about that a lot of like having to like me saying I would prefer that and then letting her deal with saying that it was okay with her dealing with that pain instead of like losing her child. So I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I came to like some internal mental conclusion like I'm like, but
Mhm.
that was a thought in my mind as well when I was younger. The
Yeah. And
Brody,
you,
right?
yeah. But you brought up a good point that, like, especially with older family members, it becomes increasingly more difficult to talk about because then you get into this
Mhm.
territory where people are like, oh, are you just waiting for me to die? And like, are you being selfish with that? But it's like, no, like, it's kind of like preparing yourself for it allows those difficult emotions when they do come, you can
Mhm.
process them easier because you don't have like genuine panic over dealing with the
Yep.
details on top of the really difficult emotional and like mental loss of relationship with and
Mhm.
loss of the people themselves.
Yeah. Hmm. Like I don't know where I would even start to like where do you start when you like no one talks about that. Like where do you start when you lose
Mhm.
parent? Who do you call first? There's so many
Yeah,
Um,
things that go into it.
there's a lot of details
I
that
hate to
people
break
don't
it
think
to
about.
I hate to break it to both of you, but I think you all know that we will be the three people in our respective families who are the people called.
We're gonna get
No,
into
I
it
know, but
about
that's what I'm saying. I was like, I don't know who I call next. Like insurance, like who I got, like
yeah.
funeral home. Like where's the best funeral? Like I wouldn't
You have
know
to
where
call
to even
911
start. Well, no, I know
Well,
that, but I'm assuming I'm in NYC,
afterwards. Yeah. Oh,
mhm,
so
mhm.
you
you call
know,
the airline.
no,
Fly. Yeah, you can call
yes,
from the
airline is the
airport.
first one to fly out, but
Listen,
I for me, unfortunately, I do I'm an anxious little human being. And so sometimes I do get that fear when I get these like spontaneous calls. I'm like, whatever.
What happened?
Or when my mom, I had told her she got to stop doing that. She's gotten better at it. But when she'll call and then I miss it somehow, and then she calls back 2 minutes later, and then she calls back 2 minutes later, and then it's her anxiety saying, "Oh my gosh, where's my daughter?" But for me, I'm like, "What happened?"
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, especially
that's
being
one of
so
my
far from
things.
people
Mhm.
is and the other thing that I think is difficult to like really think about when you're like it feels like such a big issue is it's not
Mhm.
just the day after, the week after. Like there are things you have to continually deal with past arranging for the funeral and things like that. You have to do your loved one's taxes the next time taxes are due.
Mhm.
Like there's things that
Oh
I
my
feel like so
God.
easily fall through the cracks because you don't because we are kind of afraid to breach the topic in general because it links to all these like heavy emotions. But it's like, if you
Yeah.
don't do that, you can run into problems.
Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. That's so true. But since we already started talking about it a little bit, I do want to talk about what that preparation looks like. Um, and we kind of, so what are some things people should consider and prepare for in the event of death? So we talked about it a bit, but what are some other things?
I mean, I feel like the number one thing always is like in the moment at that time, how expensive it
Oh,
is.
yeah.
Like I just recently found out, not recently, but in the last like 2, 3 years, found out how expensive it is to be born,
Yeah.
to have a birth. It
Mm.
is so expensive to die
If
Yeah.
anything, I
and
want to
to
say
have
more.
100%, because you have to pay
Yeah.
for all these things. Like even if you are being cremated, which is like the option that my family looks into, or at least my
Mm,
parents, both of them.
mm,
Um, that's still a whole process. You have to pay for the entire process, and then you have to pay for the little box or the little urn or whatever you decide to
yeah.
have like the ashes displayed in, and then they charge you so much for those little things.
Mm,
Then for the services, if you're going to do the services, and then for all of the like other like legal fees and things like
Mhm.
that as you're working everything out, it's just like more and more and more. And
yeah.
it's kind of ridiculous, and it doesn't like hit you how much until it's in the moment. Like my abuela has already told my parents, she's my last grandparent alive. She's already said she's put away enough money where we should be fine. We don't have to worry about any of the costs of like her service, her funeral, anything like that. She'll be good to go. It just might be a few other things here and there that we might need to worry about. She's like, I don't want you guys to stress about that. So here,
Mm,
Mhm.
but money's a huge one.
Yeah. And like
yeah.
what your desires are for your remains and your the things that you leave behind after death, whether that's sell all my stuff, get rid of it, don't worry about it, or I want you to go through and pick whatever things you want from my place. Um,
Mhm.
even things like the time end of life before death, wishes for that, like at what point, things that are pretty big to consider, like, if you're in the hospital and your quality of life is just going downhill, do you want to leave it on the people that are left to have to make that final call? Do you want to leave some guidelines behind? Like those are things
Mhm.
to consider as well before the like actual time
Yeah.
of death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, even really minor things like passwords. Like if you just have all your passwords in your noggin, or that you have a little notebook somewhere in your house, and
Yeah.
then when somebody's trying to, find all your financial information to do your taxes for you next year, how are they going to find that if you don't have it?
I think about that quite often. Like my mom and I can kind of guess each other's passwords for the most part, but like you know, that's
Mhm.
another that was the thing I thought about just in general. You know,
And
how to
where
prove.
important paperwork might be or other things like that. Because once when that person is gone, if all those little things, because people end up stashing things in weird places to keep them safe, and like
Yeah.
you have to try and track that down if when you're
Yeah.
dealing with it.
Hmm. Um, there was a, I always thought, and this has been the thought, once again, dealt with death pretty young. So this was always a thought in my head too. Like, it's important to know how people want to be laid to rest.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
some people have requests, and I guess sometimes some people don't listen to those requests. Um, and that's a big deal in itself, because there's a huge difference between cremation or burial. And I don't know if y'all know, but human composting is a thing. And you can be turned into
Hmm.
soil.
My mama wants to do that, but then I tell her, what if I
Hey,
move away from you? Like,
I
what if I have to sell
know.
my house, mama? I'm gonna have to dig you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you can keep some in a jar just in case.
Yeah. You can, for me, I thought about the idea. It'd be really cool to be like, go to a few places, see where you could plant these trees at. Pop me in a
Hmm.
few places. I'm a traveler anyways.
Yeah.
I think that'd be cute.
Oh,
It's
that's gonna make me
expensive though.
cry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
And
Oh yeah. No,
and
it's just
Yeah.
things
so perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So
No, it's really exciting.
when I found out about it, I think it was like a TikTok that had popped up one day, or like Instagram. This was like 2 years ago or so. I was like, wait, I want to be a tree.
yeah,
I
And so
the
yeah, I think that's what I would
alternative
like to do.
mhm. the alternative choices for death, I think, are really interesting. And even things that like donating your body,
Mhm.
things you can do with ashes. Like one thing that my mom's talked about is there are different like things you can do to like create art pieces with people's remains, like ashes and things like that, and
Mhm.
things like putting them in like little sculptures or like making
Mhm.
jewelry pieces out of them so that somebody can like carry a piece of you with them
Yeah.
after your death. I think those are really sweet and good sentimental like things to
Mhm.
keep someone near you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I like the jewelry one.
Same, yeah. I think if so I understand if didn't get the funds accordingly for
Mm,
that, my preference would be human composting. But
mm,
if not, cremation would be kind of a similar idea scale. I also had always just like the idea, I go back to this a lot, like I get it doesn't make sense anymore because we're running out of space as as a world for like
mm,
burials and such. And I found out some more details about those kind of things that I was like, apparently like some burial places like are allowed to dig you up and then take you out and have another spot open for somebody else. But I always liked the idea of like being able to visit a grave site and
mm.
because I never got that. My dad was cremated, and so um I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what that would be like because I also don't like the idea of just like being cremated and just existing in a jar. Doesn't
Yeah,
seem
Yeah.
fun. But yeah.
I don't I for me cremation, and I think it's because of I don't like American
Mm.
cemeteries.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't enjoy the fact that all of the ones I have been to, you were just walking on people.
Mm,
Yeah.
Because in Nicaragua, and we'll see, I'll go to El Salvador for the first time. I'm gonna get to visit my abuelo there. But in Nicaragua, they have like cement
Hmm.
over the areas. So you know
mm.
exactly where all the bodies are and you know
Gotcha.
where each person is. It's more kind of like it's kind of like oh, what's the word? I forgot what the word is. The word for where they keep the dead people. The
Mm.
catacomb?
Yeah.
Oh, got
Yeah.
you. Okay.
Like that, but like in the ground. Like you know where everybody is. So I don't feel like I'm stepping on anybody. And
Mm,
it's colorful and it's beautiful. Like they will like
Mm.
paint these things. And then there's always flowers. Like it doesn't need to just be Dia de los Muertos or any
Mhm.
time period. Like it's just like constant like color and beauty. And I love that. And I can't with all of these cemeteries I've been to in the US. I don't want to be in the ground with people
Mhm.
just like walking over my body. I don't think I'll be
Mhm.
in the ground, but I don't want my body there. So mine's
Yeah.
cremation. What to do after that? Don't
Who's
know
to
yet,
say?
but cremation.
That's
yeah.
fair. Yeah. I don't know. Did I ever tell y'all? I'm pretty sure I have. When I go to work, I'm by a cemetery every day. Have I ever mentioned that before? Oh,
No.
okay. Yeah, because um so for New York peeps, the Briarwood location, it's right by the Maple Grove Cemetery. So when you exit the subway, literally I'm exiting, I turn the gate to the cemetery is right there. And it took me a good chunk of a while to realize it officially was a cemetery because all of the things are flat.
Hmm.
There's no like
Headstones.
raised headstones, yeah. So like I'd be like, I can't tell this is just grass, this is a park, and I was like, and then I would be like, okay, my Uber's here, I gotta go. And then finally I was like, no, this is a cemetery. But people walk through it to cut corners to get to work. So I was thinking it was a park, but no, it's a
Mm.
cemetery. Um, but yeah. And then I saw the creepiest one recently as well. It was old. It reminded me of like where's the key? Where's the key? Like the haunted
Oh
mansion. It was
no.
very creepy.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Very
Mm-mm.
creepy. By BJ's in Queens, yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to keep going on. So out of curiosity, as well too, like in regards to wills, I'm curious about that. I feel like I have to research what a freaking will looks like. Also too, like what solidifies a will? How do you know that that person wrote it in the first place? You know what I'm saying? Because there's been a lot of that
Mhm.
kind of fraudulent activity before too. So I'm like, if I write a will, obviously like nobody else is with me. But it's another thing if like
Mhm.
if I was married or something, it's like how do I know you wrote it or if your spouse wrote it or something. Like, how do they solidify wills? You know any information about that, like law wise? I'm curious.
My parents made
I
me write their will.
Oh.
You can have like a notary sign it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's usually they'll take
Mm,
your ID, and so they have a notary like stamp, so they could say, I certify that I
Yep.
verify
mm,
that this is the person creating this will. There are some
mm,
services that will keep your will on file and things like that. So when the time comes and they hear that you've passed, then they will hand off the will to your executor. So then
mm,
they can kind of get the process started of like, here's the list of things that this person wants.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some like
okay.
medical forms and stuff you can fill out, like advanced healthcare directives that
Yeah.
you can either have a notary sign or you can have witnesses sign. I think
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm,
need 2 or 3 witnesses. Um, and like that, it's kind of a similar thing where you're like naming a person that's going to be carrying out your wishes for at least for the medical side of things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The notary is the route that my parents decided to take. My dad, like, I looked up like the format for wills, like the things that should be included in them. My dad went through, was like, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, kind of thing.
Mm,
My mom chipped in ideas as well. We have things in place of like if my mom goes first, and then if my dad goes first, if they happen to go
Mm-hmm.
together, we
mm,
have scenarios for what happens if the three of us go and Cassandra is
Mm-hmm.
left.
mm,
Um, and so yeah, I've typed all of those out and I've made edits
Mm-hmm.
in the years since. I think we sat down and did that when I was like 19, 18, 19 the first time. Around the
okay.
time I was going to college
Yeah.
was when we really sat down a little bit after my abuelo had passed away because it was at the point where my
Yeah.
dad was able to process like we need to have this set in stone.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's good.
But
That's preparation.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but I also know of people where there was a will in place, things were done, but then someone's like, I actually think I have the right to this, or actually, you know what? I don't think you should have this. So I know like multiple situations where people have sued each other or things have gotten tangled
Mm,
up in like law where like the loved one passed away like 4 years ago, and to this day they're still
mm,
figuring out all of those details because it's someone was like, no, I'm entitled
mm.
to this rather than what the will said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is so interesting. It is very is it so intriguing what the result of someone's death could do in regards to how people feel about money as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that will bring out some people's true colors for sure. I feel like.
Yeah. For some people, I do think that maybe one of the ways that they deal with the difficult emotions of losing someone is kind of to like have this expectation of like, oh, when they pass, like their assets will come to me, and that will be like some way that I can feel more secure, even though there's like this total like loss of control when it comes to death. It's like, well, I'll still have this to like help me feel more secure. And then when the reality comes through, and it's like, first of all, death is expensive. Usually people
Mm,
aren't leaving you, millions of dollars.
Mm-mm.
You have other people that those assets are being shared with, like thinking of that as a payday, as a way to like help you feel better emotionally, often
mm,
leads to disappointment, and like it makes those difficult feelings even harder because you're like, and now I'm upset about this because I was hoping that there would be something that would make me feel better about it, and it's not coming.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
then there's all that trickiness. Like Nicole, you mentioned taxes. I didn't realize that until right now. When you said that, I went, I don't you know. I don't want to
Yeah,
know.
there's this
Oh God.
hilarious TikTok that I saw that was these two daughters, and they're like, it had been about a year since their mom had passed, and they're like maybe in their 30s or 40s, and they were like making this video to their mom. It was like, here's all the things that we've screwed up like since your death. Like they didn't
Mm,
re-register her car, they didn't get it new insurance, so
Mm,
they had to like didn't realize that you had to do that. There were just all these aspects that like they hadn't really thought ahead about, and so
yeah.
they only ended up finding out about them when they had to deal with it later. They didn't know they had to file her taxes, which is where I remembered that fact. There were
Mm,
yeah.
just so many things that they were like, yeah, we didn't even realize that this was something we had to consider. They
yeah.
were having in good spirits about it though. That was kind of funny.
Yeah. People, I one thing dark humor TikTok, like it's just like, hey, this is how I get through it. There was a recent trend. Oh my gosh. It was a recent trend where it was like multiple people um talking about their dead relative or whatever. And I'll give you one example is like things my father did, and then pause for a second, died. It's like, whoa, like things my father did that, rating them, and they're rating 0 out of 10. Like, oh
I
my
mean,
goodness.
yeah.
I mean, you know what? Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
but
0 out of 10.
hmm so I understand it though. Some people grieve in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I'd probably be a
honestly,
humor person as well. I
Oh
think I
God.
yeah,
need to get there.
I already
No.
know.
Yeah.
I know for a
Eventually.
fact I am not.
Ah,
I feel like
yeah.
eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably be cracking jokes while I'm crying at the same time. That
Yeah.
sounds about my brand. Yeah.
Like
Uh-huh.
a lot, and the thing is, a lot of people in my family are the same way. So I know that like
Mhm.
the first like really big, rough, close family funeral that we're gonna have is gonna be a stand-up comedy show because we cannot like be normal and process things regularly.
Yeah. Oh. Um, I want to talk about, since we're already there, what it looks like to handle grief and those emotional reactions. Um, with the experiences so far that you've had in life, um, how do you personally handle grief, or even how do you think you would handle grief in the loss of a loved one? You got any coping mechanisms, or you just be existing? Because I don't think I have any coping mechanisms.
When the first real like death that I experienced, where it wasn't like, oh, someone I knew or someone I knew had someone who they lost, and I went to the funeral or service. The first time it was me
Mhm.
was my dad's dad, my abuelo,
Mm.
and that one was kind of both of my abuelos were kind of surprises. Like we had gone to
Mm.
visit him in June of 2015.
Mm.
And he was great. He was taking us all over the place. He dropped us off at the airport, and this I super remember clearly, and I'm gonna try to say it without crying. He like had this little like cane, his little
Mm.
cane that would turn into a seat. So he was just there, sentado, just looking at us as we were going up the escalator. And he was
Yeah.
crying because he had told my dad that he felt like it was the last time he was gonna see us.
Oh.
So cut to November, December. I think it was like
Hmm.
a week or two before Christmas. He had a fall, went to the doctor, and brain tumor. Brain
Mm.
tumor to the point where he was very good friends. Like his best friend was a doctor. He looked at it. He was like, he has maybe 2 months. We would have
Mm.
never known. So we
Yeah.
flew. We went for about a week. In that Christmas, New Year's time, we left on the 26th and we came back on New Year's Eve. So we
Mm.
went for 5 days. And the whole time from when we left and I had to say goodbye to like
Mm.
when he eventually passed in January, you could not speak to me. I wasn't talking about him up until like a
Yeah.
year ago. I could make it through the story of him dying without crying, but
Mm.
this was in 2016. It took
Mm.
until like 2 years ago for me to stop
Mhm.
crying every time I heard it. Um, just because that's who I am. And it was the first one. And then with my mom, I was a little different because with my mom, I ended up going with her when her dad passed. And I didn't want her to have to worry about me.
Mm.
So most of my crying happened separately, and I was able to keep that and grieve in a less like expressive way than I had with my
Yeah.
abuelo, my other abuelo. So I think like that is the thing that maybe reassures me. But with my abuelo, the first one, someone brought over a full 12 pack of Cinnabons. I ate 10 of those within a span of like 36 hours. I
Yeah.
cleared the box. I'm a stress
Yeah.
eater. I will eat food. Food is what will keep me alive.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that like allowing yourself to grieve in whatever way works best for you. Like obviously you don't want to be doing things that are like self-destructive or hurtful to other people, but like
Yeah.
if what somebody needs is to sit and cry until they feel better, like it is difficult and terrible, one of the worst things that anybody has to deal with. So I feel like the really it's the time to give yourself the most grace ever, because first of all, it brings up hard feelings about like losing somebody, and if you had any like unresolved like things, there's always those regrets of like I
Mm-hmm.
never told them this or how much they meant to me. And then there's also the like more existential part of it. I think that dealing with anyone else's death, you're always like, and what about like the end for me? Like that's always something that kind of haunts any loss, is like
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what the unknown and the loss of control when that is coming for you as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's also a really hard thing that people have to deal with. So it's like allowing yourself to feel whatever you need to feel in grieving. Like that's the only thing you can really do for yourself.
Yeah. And it's hard to there's no like right way to do it. Everyone has
Mhm.
their own, and they of course they have like those the stages of grief and stuff, but even then everybody kind of grieves in their own way. Um of course I do think like denial has its own different phases. There's subgenres in that,
Oh
and then
yeah.
Mhm.
going into the next things and the next things. Um for me, I personally feel I do not handle it the way I could best. I don't think I handle death very well. Um in my experiences at this point, when I lost my dad, it was very much it was a very similar situation in the sense of um crying to myself, not really wanting to cry with my mom because I know she was going through it herself and things like that. And I get what you said, Sabrina, because that took years as well to finally just be okay, like thinking about him. And in that sense too, there's a grief in a sense of loss of what could have been. And I think
Mhm.
that was a very specific type of grief that hit me because sorry, my eyes itchy, I'm not crying. Because um it was like, dang, um, there was a certain point that specifically that point in my life where he was actually starting to be more involved, and I was like, dang, what could
Mhm.
have been now, and like a year from now, what could have been done? Having two parents, I only have one now, like those kind of things I thought about a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think of that throughout the lines, we lost family members here and there along the way, not direct close family members here or there, so it didn't hit as hard, but it was like it was felt though. And then I lost my great grandma in when I moved to NYC. I don't know. I always think about like life and coincidences and things, but she literally died the day I moved. Like she died before I flew out to New York. And so that was so interesting because that was something that we were always fearful of happening at some point. She made it very far, like 97. Um, and she had dementia. She had dementia for a few years at that point because she had fell. So she wasn't 100% herself anymore. It came and went. It came and went. And so visiting her, say a week before, knowing that, um, she was gonna pass soon and she could no longer talk and she was just kind of staring and at it like that was like I was like, I don't
Mhm.
know what to do. I'm just standing and my mom, I feel like my mom and I handle it very similarly because the doctors were like, you can like hold her hand, like you could I was just like I was just kind of standing there like we're talking to you, but I'm like, you're kind of freaking
Mhm.
out in that sense. And then when I lost my chair bear, my doggo, and we're gonna talk about this too, um, that was the most traumatic death I think I've ever experienced. And for a while, that first 2, 3 years, there's even times sometimes when I still think about her and I still tear up, but I don't like cry anymore. But man, did I not think I would cry that bad over a dog. Okay, listen,
It's
I
your
was
baby.
I was God,
Yeah.
and then she died so terribly.
Oh.
And when she was dying, I was in a state of shock. Like I was like, sorry, pre-warning to the listeners out there. Let me just give you a heads up real quick. My dog died murdered by another dog, our neighbor's dog. My dog was incredibly small. The other dog came, bit her, and it was over from there pretty much. So, um, there was blood all over the floor. Like I just remember stepping out of the car and seeing blood. She ran to the back of the garage. Imprinted in my mind, team. Blood trailed all the way to where she ran to hide, and I was trying to call for her and I was also freaking out. And I couldn't pick her up because I was like, so the neighbor, I'm tell their business. The mom, she doesn't live there anymore. I'm pretty sure they got divorced because they like one there. But she came and she picked up the dog and she felt so bad. And she was just holding her while she was literally bleeding out and dying. There's nothing we could do. And that tore me up. But you know, it surprised me. And here's the comedic factor in this. I was all about that dog. You would have thought I was laid out on the floor. My mom, all I heard was, ah! She just fell out by the mailbox. I said, oh, snap. This is real. Like, I was like, that was shook to me because she would always be like, oh, that dog gets on my nerves, bawling out on in the middle of the street.
Mm,
Um, so for me, I don't like the fact that I kind of freak out a little bit and shut
mm,
down because then I go back and I think about, oh, how I could have handled those things better or what I could have done better. Maybe I would have held my grandma's hand, my great grandma's hand, or, maybe I would have held Cherry even though she was like bleeding out and dying. I just think about those things a lot, but it's not necessarily an regret of just like, okay, how can I, whatever that is, that how can I start healing in those ways so I can avoid those situations in the future, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense because there's always regrets when you think about like, especially with the finality of death. Like, there's nothing
Yeah.
you can't go back and change the things you've done
Yeah.
before, and you can't go forward and do something different with that person, with that relationship
Mhm.
next time, because there is no next time. And
Mhm.
like, also that's I think almost heavier to me than death itself is the like feeling that something might be the last time you see someone, um especially like older relatives and things like that.
Yeah.
um my all of my grandparents have passed, and the hardest one was my dad's dad because
Mhm.
of like the because of he did not deal with like getting older well. Like he was a very strong in control man his entire life, and so getting older and having to like defer to other people for health things and
Mhm.
stuff like that was really hard for him. And so like the that I think was harder than dealing with like the aftermath of actually losing him, is like this pre-grieving process that like there's still echoes of where it's like, oh, like I feel like I pre-grieved so much that like when it actually came to the loss, it was like the it is more difficult before and after than actually dealing with the like fact of the loss. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of that has to do with like you look back on things, you're like, oh, I wish I could have changed this, this, and that, and like you, it's you can't. It's really hard.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
always think of like, for me, as I've gotten older, it's now the parents that I'm super
Mm,
focused on. And I remember
yeah.
when my dad and my sister went to go get me. They asked me to like take a step out of like my American like class on
Mm,
campus. They like found me. They got my location and everything. And they went to go get me when my abuela passed away. And I remember sitting in that car, and once I was like calmed down a bit, just looking at my dad and being like, he's an orphan now. I
mm,
don't care that he is 50 years old. I was like,
Yeah.
that's that's that. And then it clicked in my
Mhm.
brain. I was like, no, I'm not gonna think about it. I'm not gonna think about one day that will be
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
But there's that thought too of like,
yeah.
Yeah. No, I got you. I'm tapping in. I'm tapping in, Sabrina. I see.
Yeah.
No, that is also something I thought about. So I'm glad you mentioned that too. Uh, I lost my great grandma, but then I also thought like my grandma lost her mom,
Mhm.
and like that was someone she had known for 60 plus years, you know? So that was something wild to process because I think also like it's I don't know how to explain this 100%, but it's sometimes I tend for like parents have parents who have parents who have parents. I'm like,
Yes.
so it's like, like no, like even though you don't see them together in those roles anymore, specifically as we would see the stereotypical like parent and, you
yeah,
know,
Mhm.
um child, because my great grandma had been in a nursing care home for like those past few years, but it's like
Mhm.
no, like she had to see her mom no longer really be her mom anymore. And that's also always
Mhm.
been one of my fears. As like y'all know, I can't stand the idea of like Alzheimer's, dementia, like
Mhm.
Parkinson. Like I hate neurodegenerative diseases. I feel like um where science failed is actually properly researching the brain. I think they focus on so many other things, like why aren't brain checks a normalized thing, and
Hmm.
MRIs and etc. Like I just feel like that's so strange. And so that was always one of my fears. But it literally was like she fell and that was it. If she
Hmm.
was fine before, she fell
Yep.
and that was it. So it's just so interesting to see like what those changes, those one moment in time can make such like drastic changes
Hmm.
in multiple people's lives. But um to add on to that, that's also one of my personal fears of like,
Hmm.
that's always been my like, oh, I don't want Alzheimer, like, oh, gross. Um, things like that.
Yeah.
I watched The Notebook, the musical
I knew you were gonna
recently,
bring
as
that
y'all
up.
know. Yeah. I didn't cry. I said, you will not get me today. But it was hard. Like, um, it was very hard to watch and to see her perspective a little bit more of like, I don't, I know you, but I don't know you. And I know
Hmm.
myself, but I also don't know myself. It's like they did that very well. Like we don't really see like we see get little snippets in the movie, but to have her have a whole song dedicated to like seeing her past selves
Hmm.
and reaching for something that she can't grasp anymore. They, that,
Yeah.
they really did.
I think of Queen Charlotte when I think of that too.
Mm.
Farmer
Of
George.
that scene where they're underneath and then they
Yeah.
see each other as young, but you have that like one of them is young, one of them is older, and then both of them, and then they're back to their older selves and things like that, and just like
Yeah.
how it's moments of clarity. That's how it was with my abuelo too. And
Mm,
those last few days where I saw him, he
mm,
recognized me once in the like
mm,
5 days, and it's just boom, and that's so scary,
Hmm.
mhm.
so
Seriously,
scary.
Yeah.
literally wild. Yeah, we kind of, I think my mom and I, because we would visit her together. I never 100% visit all the time with my grandma, but I would say we kind of handled it in person very well. Like I said, I kind of get the jokesy vibe from my mom a bit. So my mom be like, hey, so I'm not gonna say my grandma's name out loud, but like, hey, so and so, like, oh, girl, you look good today. Like, like
Mm.
really kind of hyping her up. There'd be times where my grandma called me my mom and, things like that. And then she'd be like, no, this is so and so. Like, she handled it very well, even though I'm sure it was hard for her to see just as much as it was hard for me to see. Um, and then I've talked about how specifically to y'all, like how my great grandma had like kind of like extra spiritual connections, I feel like. And there'd be
Mm.
times where
Hmm.
she would say she's oh hey, this person's visiting, and I'd be like, girl, who you see? Because there's no one next to me. Um, but yeah, I it's so interesting. And as I get older, while I don't like to talk about death, it is something that I try to start processing now of like the beauty of life
Hmm.
in that like I'm trying to mentally prepare myself now um to kind of understand that. But no, me and grief and what that looks like, it's gonna look very different person to person for sure.
Hmm.
But no, I can't even imagine. I had almost lost my friend in 2020, and when I found out about that, my other friend, my first roommate, she messaged me. She said, "Hey, I don't know if you know, but so and so was in the I said, "What?" I was in Sam's Club. I like froze and I like had literally just started tearing up. And my mom was like, "What's going on? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I was like, "Look at this message." But she's fine now. Um, but you know, she's still dealing with the results of that as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm.
I don't want to tell her story for her, but um, yeah, no, grief is
Yeah.
it's hard because especially when you can't process it beforehand.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Like kind of like how you mentioned earlier as well. It's like if I can kind of mentally prepare, but when things are sudden, oh, that's what hurts really the most, I feel like for me. And I hurt for other people when that happens to them as well. Because
Yeah.
I have seen things pop up where it's like someone so died from an accident or so and so died from this. And it's people I know who have lost people. Um, and
Yeah.
it's like yeah.
One of yeah. Um, my first year of college, we got a message saying a kid who was a year younger than me, who had dated one of my closest friends our sophomore year of high school, he passed away in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just one of those things. But I was like, it was a little 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And I was like, I literally saw him like a year ago doing this, and he was being dumb, being like super, like his super sweet little like self, and then
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's
the
one of
unexpected
my,
ones.
oh
Mm.
yeah. So I was gonna say it's not even a rational fear, it's an anxiety fear because I tend to think about it sometimes. Like when people are like, "Oh, I'm driving somewhere." Huh? You're you're going on the freeway. Like
You
it's so
you don't enter my car and not put on your seatbelt.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, mm-mm.
Hmm.
Not an
I
option.
drive super safe because you know that I am literally like 6 inches from that steering wheel because I'm an itty bitty person. And I'm like, I cannot have this airbag go off on me. So we're gonna drive
Yeah.
super, super carefully. And I'm gonna yell at
Mhm.
people who are dumb.
Hmm.
What's annoying about that too is though, and I'm sorry to put a negative into that, is that no matter how safe
Oh, I
you
know.
drive,
I
Hmm.
know.
it's the lack of care and consideration of other people that usually mess up and take other people's lives.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly unfortunate. So yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, I did want to move on. We did kind of talk about it a little bit. Oh, sorry, Nicole, do you have an add-on before I moved on?
Um, I just kind of was thinking about reflecting again on back to the beginning where like, so there's so many unknowns and things that we can't control when it comes to death that like, that's why when we were talking about like preparation and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
that is so important to me and to my family as like very practical people. We're like, we can't control everything with this, but what we can do is try to make the like parts that we can as easy as possible for the people that we leave behind, so you
Yeah.
have the space in your brain and in your heart to like really process the feelings without also being in a panic because you don't know what to do. I
Yeah.
mean, there's always going to be panic because like the first, I mean, for me, I always think of like the first 30 minutes after you get terrible news like that is the worst because you're just like, you don't know what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can kind of get to like, okay, let's pick one step to do next. But it's like that first period of time where you're like in shock. That it's like, you want to try and keep that as short as possible so you have the room to like actually deal with the emotions that you can't possibly deal with beforehand. So the preparation that we started with, I think that is like super important when it comes to like controlling what you can control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's so true. We talked about it a bit, but I did want to talk about like I feel like I know the answer to this, but have y'all ever dealt with like pet deaths or like animal like nothing like that? Have you before?
I have had a lot of the like house cat gets
Mm-hmm.
out and we don't see them anymore. So it is it as like
Mm.
present of a loss.
Mm-hmm.
There was one actually a couple years ago, one of my mom's cats. He was always like a very neurotic, kind of stressed out cat. And
Mm-hmm.
he got pretty sick and like poor guy, like and also like he was always like kind of semi-feral because my mom got him from the vet actually because one of the vet techs found him as a kitten, like by
Mm-hmm.
himself, stuck in a fence. And so they rescued him and my mom took him in. So he was always kind of like afraid of people a little bit.
Mhm.
But it was kind of really nice to like see, even as he was like getting sick and kind of not really feeling well, he kind of, that was when he warmed up to the people he was around the most because I think he like needed a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, he just did not deal with like not feeling well very well, and so it got to the point where he's like, well, for his quality of life, like we're starting to see a pattern where he's not
Yeah.
getting any better. And
Mm-hmm.
so that I think was the hardest part of it, is that my mom had to make the call. I'm like, are we going to try and get him better again, or
Mm-hmm.
you know how much more of this do we want to put him through where he's just
Yeah.
stressed out and hurt all the time. And so that was the hardest part of it, of like, and the harder thing with pet deaths, I think, is that because we're in charge of their well-being, it feels so much more personal.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're, even if it's totally out of your control, like you can't control if your pet gets sick, but like because you're the one that kind of has to make the final call, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have a question, Sabrina. I feel like I know the answer, but have you considered what that looks like in the future for you? Because I know you have doggos, and then like,
Oh.
how do you think you would process that?
Ugh.
Yeah.
So I haven't had my own pet pass before, but my cousin had this beautiful, beautiful mini Aussie.
Mhm.
And I spent so much time with him and like all our visits, but also the first 3 years of college. I considered him like my godson. Oh man, he was so cute. Anytime I showed up, my cousin would always be like, dude, calm down, because he thought like I
Mhm.
died, came back, something. His little butt would wiggle so much because he didn't have a
Yeah.
tail, just his whole butt.
Oh.
But he, with the traveling and everything, he got like heart problems where one day I had known he was sick, but one day I went into my mom's room and she went, I have some sad news. And I was like, ah, Jesus Christ. It's like, who
Yeah.
died? But I'm
Yeah.
thinking like Nicaragua, like a relative or something like that. She
Mhm.
goes, they just had to put Levi down. And I was like standing in the middle of the doorway and I just
Mhm.
started crying. She was like, I was like, you can't just tell me that. I was like, what?
Mhm.
What? And so it was like
Mhm.
super strange to go visit them the first time after because he wasn't
Mhm.
there. There wasn't his little paws. There was no little butt shaking.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So because of that, I will be I will not be reachable for probably a few days. Because
Mhm.
Minnie is 11. She's 11 and a half now. And every time I go to the vet, they go, she's a senior dog. If she has to do this, we have to do this. You also have to consider all of these things.
Mhm.
We are also where we're like, she's old enough where if anything were to happen, if she were to get sick, we're like, we wouldn't want her to suffer.
Mhm.
We don't want to get to that point where like it's really bad for her and things like that. But as long as she stays healthy, we're like, yay.
Yeah.
Um, but I was reading something, I want to say it was like on Pinterest or something popped up, and someone was like, even if it's hard for you, don't leave your pet for their last moments with the doctor.
Mhm.
Don't not be in that room with them when they
Yeah,
are put
exactly.
down. And I had never thought of that. And then I went, I don't know what that's going to do to me. Like listening to you tell your story of watching your little puppy pass away like there. I'm like, I don't know what that's gonna.
Mhm.
I'm gonna be out of commission for a solid amount. Cassandra maintains that Max is never dying. Max will
I
live
think
for.
it's so rude actually that pets have such a shorter lifespan than
It's
Right.
people.
Mm.
It's not right.
no,
Yeah.
it's so upsetting. I'm just here like I can't. I don't even
Mhm.
remember a time of not having her, and I got her in 8th grade. Like it's
Right.
not like I've had her my whole life.
Mhm.
I haven't even
Mhm.
had her for half of it, but I'm just like, what do you mean you won't be here forever? What do you mean you won't meet my kids? Like we were
Mhm.
we were in Disney World and I bought her her little thingy and I went, in 4 years I'll just come back and buy her another one. And then I had to stand there for a bit and not cry
Mhm.
because I was like, I don't know if she'll be here.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Mm.
no, I'll be
Yeah.
out of commission. Like,
Man, what's wild about that too is I think about like how their lifespans are so short, and even already dealing with my death, like of my dog, the death of my dog. It's like, and my stupid self would still get another dog.
well,
It's,
I
but
mean,
it's
I think
I
it's worth it, the amount of love that that
yeah,
relationship has. Like they're a family
yeah.
member.
That was my
they're
homegirl.
Mhm.
Cherry was my
the
dog. Yeah.
and I think it's funny because they can be so many, especially if it's something you got when you were little, they can be so many different roles in your life. Going back to the idea of like how you were mentioning like people have all of these roles and you don't realize it until the end. Like your
Mhm.
dog can play that too, especially if like you got it when you were little, so it's still technically your parents, but it's
Mhm.
still also yours. Like Minnie is my child, but at the same time sometimes I feel like we're actually like siblings because she's so annoying. And it's only to me, it's only to me where she'll just be like me all the time. um she looks at me sometimes like she wants to kill me and I'm just like, what?
She got
um
beef.
yeah, no, this girl's got sass. But at the same time, I'm like, that's my baby.
Mhm.
They're your babies.
Yeah. Man, oh man. Well, before we wrap up this conversation, I have one last question. What do you think we can do to normalize conversations about death in our everyday lives? What are those steps looking like?
Feel like I personally kind of had the opposite, where like because my family is kind of like, yeah, death is a reality kind of a thing. I had to learn not to talk about death with people kind of regularly because people are uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
I also like have always kind of had a somewhat morbid sense of humor, so like I'll joke around a bit, like, oh, haha, you, haven't seen you for 5 minutes. I thought you died, sort of thing. And it's kind of like I don't know, like microdosing death, so it's not something that is so heavy all the time. Like if you're constantly avoiding it, you kind of like build it up to this bigger, heavier thing in your head.
Yeah.
Um, I also feel like for me, it's always been, especially because like didn't touch on it too much, but I am religious. I do believe that I will see
Mhm.
everybody again. I do believe that
Mhm.
there is that afterlife that we will, if we led good lives, we did the best we could, we'll all meet again one day.
Mhm.
So that's always kind of been there where it's always been the thought of like, oh, you'll get to one day meet like your tío. One day you'll see your abuelos again and things like that. And sometimes I will look up and be like, listen, please do not judge me for how stupid I am being in this moment. All right.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. If you can watch this, if you can see this, I apologize. I'm
Mhm.
a bit dumb. But I think it's the practicality that will get
Mhm.
across to people more than anything. Like, I
Mhm.
hate my mom when she was like, what do you mean you're doing an episode about death? You can't talk about death. I was like, I'm gonna
Uh-huh.
make it. I might cry, but I'll do it because I think it's
Mhm.
important. I'm like, I think
Yeah.
it's super important for people to know.
Mhm.
My dad has never given me an option about like not knowing what he wants and
Yeah.
not talking about it. He's always been like, listen, you need to do this.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's just like honoring them and then taking a second and going back to what Nicole said at the beginning, it's not all sad either.
Yeah.
Like it's about celebration as well. It's a whole life
Mhm.
that was led. And it's super cliche, but that's what people say. Like death is also what makes life so much
Mhm.
more incredible because
Yeah.
you only have so much time and you have no idea what that time frame is. You don't
Yeah.
know if it's going to be just 20. You don't know if it's going to be somewhere in the 60s or if it's going to be like what you want, KaVonna, 110. Like,
Yeah.
you don't know
Yeah.
if it's going to be a whole century or if it's going to
Mhm.
be not even half of that.
Mhm.
So, like, taking the time to know that by putting all these things in place and by talking about death, you keep you have the chance to keep those memories alive. You have the chance to come together and to celebrate the lives
Mhm.
Yeah.
without being weighed down by everything else.
And
Yeah.
then it for situations where it is kind of like you have the time to like see it coming for like older
Mhm.
relatives and things like that. It I think gives people more room to recognize that and appreciate the time they have left rather than being like, oh no, now we have to get everything in order and this person may not be as cooperative because it's frightening for them, or
Mhm.
they may not have like all the faculties that you want somebody to have when making these like choices. So it
Mhm.
kind of takes that stress out of it. And as far as like addressing things with older family members, my parents luckily were very like when their parents passed, they were like, okay, I don't want you to have to deal with all this drama that I had to go through, so here's what I want, here's who's in charge of what, and this is what you're gonna do. But like for older family members who are getting to that stage of like they don't want to think about it because they're like, oh, you're just waiting for me to die or whatever, like
Mhm.
a way you can kind of reach the conversation, I think, is to be like, here's what I want. I know that I'm young and it's not gonna happen for me forever, but I was talking about this, and that. And then it kind of opens it up for them to like reciprocate those things without it being like, hey, you old person, you're gonna die. What do you want from your life? Like, because
Yeah.
it's like a mutual thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, well. So before we wrap up, I have only two.
I'm
Only
gonna kill
two.
you.
On the
I'm
episode
gonna
about
murder
death,
you. This
Okay.
this podcast is about death. I'm gonna murder you. What? What?
Chill.
hey, just like how death is inevitable, the
Oh.
The
rapid fire
rapid fire
questions are
questions are as
inevitable.
well. Okay.
Hey, just make me into a tree and we're Gucci. So,
I'm
with
gonna
that
put you
being
in
said,
all of the different spots. I'm gonna go find your favorite place in London. I'm gonna put you there.
right?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be small trees, big trees. I'll
I
take
will
them.
somehow sneak you into whatever. I will sneak you onto the Everest ride at Disney World. That's all I'm saying.
Paper. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put me where they go backwards. So I was like,
I know.
Yeah,
I was
where
just
everybody
listening
throws
to
their
your.
hair
I was just
bands.
listening to your Disney podcast. So I was like,
okay.
the episode with Daniel. I was like, that's where I'll take you. I'll
See?
sneak you in somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. So it's only two team. It's only two. So first one, it's either yes or no. Would you want to know when you died?
No,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna say no because I don't want to
no.
anticipate it. I have anxiety, so it's a no for me.
I get panic attacks about death like frequently. Like I don't need to know that.
I cope
We
with
get
things by
closer and
planning,
closer.
so
Oh yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, everybody's gonna be invited to a giant party, and I'm like,
Mhm.
you have to come. You have to do everything you can. I'm inviting you 2 years in advance. You have to come, and everyone's gonna be like, why? This is weird.
You're gonna have a whole
You're gonna
spreadsheet about the
Bilbo
rest of your
Baggins us?
years. Oh.
You're gonna
I
Bilbo
mean,
Baggins us.
I think that that's a fair way of doing it. If you knew,
Oh.
yeah,
Yeah,
to give everybody the chance, so nobody has that like, oh, if only I had like talked to them one last time sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
that's sweet. Look at you thinking of everybody even before you die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
It's so
it's
cute.
the only thing you can do for people. Like you have no choice that
Mhm.
you're going to die.
Yeah. I would just like to say this was very unrapid fire of us.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just like death is inevitable, what is
Yeah.
inevitable is us answering rapid fire questions with
Unrapid.
5-minute answers.
Yeah.
I answered
Um,
quickly. I said no.
Sorry.
yes. Yes. This time it was Nicole. And then the second and last question, which celebrity death hit you the hardest? For me, it was Chadwick. That tore
Oh,
me up. Chadwick
Corey
Boseman.
Monteith. He was the
Yeah.
first like celebrity whose name I knew that I was like, what?
That's fair.
Robin Williams.
These are all really good ones. Yes.
But
Can I
I
add?
know the day Julie Andrews dies,
Oh
Oh
yeah.
gonna be
God.
rough. That might be the only one that makes me cry.
So okay, let's add on to that real quick. What celebrity death will hurt you in the future? So you
Miss
said Julie Andrews.
Dame Julie
Um,
Andrews.
I personally, oh man, I have so many. But I think I'm gonna think of my older generations for a second here. Like I
Mm.
feel like if like Loretta Devine, Viola Davis, Loretta
Mhm.
Devine is older than Viola Davis, but I feel like those two right there for
I
me for
think death
sure.
is scared of Viola Davis.
It
As it
should
should
be.
be.
She's
Yeah.
so intimidating.
hmm
She's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, she's so
She
good.
gets to decide when she leaves.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Nicole?
I'm trying to think because like I feel like I don't have many celebrities that I like follow so closely that I
hmm
would anticipate feeling really torn up about them. There are a lot of them
hmm
that kind of come out of nowhere for me. The one
Yeah.
name that's coming to mind is like somebody that my mom's a really big fan of is Donny Osmond. She like he was the Joe Jonas of her growing up. She when she was a tween and a young teen, she had a huge crush on him. So like when he passes, I'm gonna be like, oh no, like that's he does not feel like to me he's still from when he was on the Donnie Marie show and like
Yeah.
in his
Mhm.
early 20s. So
Yeah.
the thinking about him passing will be like, no, he's not allowed.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. Man. Well, listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this conversation talking about death today. While it can be pretty intense and serious, I do want to invite the idea of like celebrating life and that idea um going forward and just like preparing and planning. I think that's really important. That's why we had this conversation today, just to put a light onto it. Thank you, Sabrina and Nicole, for joining this conversation. We made it through tier list, so that's
Yeah,
good. And
barely. Almost.
and
I
then
think
I
Yeah,
know
everybody had
almost.
a
Almost.
we had a
almost,
couple of
yeah.
them.
Um, but yeah, I definitely think I encourage listeners out there to start these important conversations with your loved ones. Something I didn't get to talk about too much, but even like going back and looking at your history. Some people don't like to talk about the past, but I think that's also a really cool way to start that conversation of your mom's mom or your, and keep going down that line in that generation to kind of know more about your history too, because eventually when people are lost, there's no way to really go back. And I think that's another important thing. But thank you for tuning in and listening to this conversation. Make sure you share, like, and follow this podcast. We're trying to get to 1,000 listeners this year. So make sure you really, really share it, whether it's on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, wherever. Send to a friend, a family member, a loved one. Follow me at KaVonna on Instagram to get podcast updates, and also at the Introvert Social Hour on TikTok. And the content is popping off on there. I have a challenge to be posting at least every day, so check it out. Get some sunshine, get some air, have an amazing week. I will see you next week on the Introvert Social Hour. Thanks for joining. Bye.